They say betrayal always comes.
Light exchanges than the deep conversations they once shared. Avi tried to brush it off as nerves, but his gut told him something wasn't right. The signs were there, but Avi couldn't bring himself to face them. His world, which had once been so sure and secure, was beginning to feel a little too fragile. Still, he held on to hope that this was just a temporary phase, a bump in the road after a major success. Charlotte, sensing that Avi was becoming more withdrawn, suggested a weekend getaway to Santorini, a place they had always dreamed of visiting. She thought it would help them reconnect and relax after the stress of the acquisition. Avi agreed, eager to escape the pressures of his high-stakes world for a few days and focus on his marriage. The villa they rented was breathtaking, perched on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the shimmering blue waters of the Aegean Sea. It was the perfect setting for a romantic escape, or so Avi thought. But even in paradise, the nagging feeling in his chest refused to go away. On their second evening after dinner, Charlotte excused herself to go for a walk along the beach, leaving Avi alone in their villa. She seemed eager to get away for a while, and though Avi initially wanted to join her, something inside him held him back. Instead, he decided to give her some space. He sat down on the balcony, gazing out at the waves, trying to calm his restless thoughts. But then something caught his eye. From the corner of the balcony, he noticed Charlotte walking towards the beach, but she wasn't alone. There, standing on the shore, was Daniel. Avi's heart skipped a beat as he saw the two of them standing close together, speaking in hushed tones. He couldn't hear their words, but their body language was unmistakable. Charlotte leaned in, laughing softly at something Daniel had said, and then, to Avi's horror, they kissed. Avi froze, his stomach churning. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Charlotte, his wife, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, was kissing Daniel, his closest business partner, the man who had helped him build everything. His entire world shattered in that single moment. Avi couldn't move. His legs felt like lead, his head spinning as he tried to process the truth. He had been blind to the signs, the warning bells that had been ringing in his mind for months. Charlotte and Daniel's betrayal had been happening right under his nose, and he had been too naive to see it. With his heart pounding in his chest, Avi stormed down to the beach, his hands shaking with anger and disbelief. Charlotte and Daniel, startled by his sudden appearance, quickly separated, their faces flushed with guilt. Charlotte opened her mouth to speak, but Avi cut her off. "How long has this been going on?" Avi's voice was cold, each word laced with the sting of betrayal. Charlotte's face turned pale. She hesitated for a moment, but then, with a coldness that made Avi's blood run cold, she spoke. "It's been happening for months, Avi," she admitted, her voice almost mechanical. "I've been with Daniel for a long time, and I don't regret it." Avi's world seemed to collapse in that instant. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-scale conspiracy, a plot that had been unfolding behind his back for months. "I never wanted to hurt you," Charlotte continued, but Avi didn't hear her anymore. The words seemed to blur into a cacophony of disbelief in his ears. "How could you do this to me?" "To us?" Avi asked, his voice breaking. "You've been lying to me, using me, while you and Daniel—" Charlotte's face softened for a moment, but there was no remorse in her eyes. "It was never about you, Avi," she said coldly. "It was always about what you could give me, what we could have together, Daniel and I. Now that your company is sold, there's nothing left for me here. It's over." Avi stood there, numb. The woman he had given everything for was gone, replaced by a stranger who had used him for her own gain. But the betrayal didn't stop there. Not only had Charlotte stolen his heart, but she had also stolen his business. In the days that followed, Avi's life spiraled out of control. Charlotte and Daniel wasted no time in solidifying their takeover of Avitech Solutions. Using their newfound relationship, they manipulated board members and investors into backing them over Avi. They forced Avi out, stripping him of his position, and cutting him off from the company he had built from the ground up. The sale of the company had left Avi with nothing but a shattered reputation and a broken heart. Charlotte's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional. She had used his own success to destroy him, and now Daniel was at the helm of the very company Avi had founded. Avi could still hear the waves crashing against the rocky shore of Santorini in his ears, even though he was thousands of miles away now, sitting in the cold emptiness of his Manhattan apartment. The photograph of him and Charlotte, once a symbol of their love, now felt like a reminder of the betrayal that had ripped his life apart. Every glance at that photo, every passing thought about his lost empire, burned him deeper than any physical wound ever could. His mind raced as he replayed the scenes of the beach over and over. Charlotte and Daniel. The kiss. The look in her eyes when she admitted the affair. The coldness in her voice when she spoke of ending everything between them. It had been a betrayal on so many levels, and it was clear now that everything he had built, everything he had worked so hard for, had been a tool to get her closer to what she truly wanted. The days following the confrontation were a blur of legal battles. Charlotte and Daniel, now fully united, took swift action. They pushed Avi out of Avi Tech Solutions with ruthless efficiency, seizing control of the company with no remorse. The contract that once guaranteed Avi's position was rendered null and void, leaving him with nothing but the sinking feeling of losing everything that mattered. But the worst part? It wasn't just the loss of the company. It wasn't just the betrayal of his wife and his best friend. It was the cold realization that Charlotte had used him, not just for his love, but for his ambition, his wealth, and his power. Everything they had built together was a facade, a plan to secure her future with Daniel. The once loyal partner had now become the villain in his own life story. Avi sat hunched over in his office, the dim light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across his face. He had moved out of the penthouse, leaving behind the life he had shared with Charlotte. The void in the apartment was almost as empty as his heart. He had to figure out his next move, but he couldn't do it alone. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The line rang a few times before the voice on the other end picked up. "Avi, is everything okay?" The voice was warm, familiar, the sound of a long-lost ally. "Aaron," Avi said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I need help." Aaron had been Avi's lawyer and trusted confidant since the early days of Avi Tech Solutions. He had been with him during every critical business decision, every legal battle, and every corporate maneuver. They had seen both the good and the bad together. Aaron had always been the one to keep Avi grounded when things got rough. And now, Avi needed him more than ever. They met in a small cafe tucked away in the financial district. The buzz of the city around them felt like a distant hum compared to the intense quiet between them. Avi had spent the last few days drowning in a sea of paperwork, trying to pick up the shattered pieces of his life. But there was still something missing. He couldn't just let Charlotte and Daniel get away with this. Not without a fight. As Aaron sat down across from him, he immediately noticed the dark circles under Avi's eyes, the weariness that had settled in his posture. The once confident entrepreneur was now a man broken by betrayal. "What happened, Avi?" Aaron asked softly, his eyes searching his old friend's face. "How bad is it?" Avi leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the rim of his coffee cup. "They took everything, Aaron. My company, my wife, my dignity, Charlotte and Daniel. They've been planning this for months. And now, they've got it all. The company, the money, the life I built. It's all gone. And I can't let them." "Get away with it." Aaron's eyes hardened. "What are you thinking?" "I want to take it all back," Avi replied, his voice cold. "I want them to pay for what they did. Not just for the company, but for everything. I want to ruin them." Aaron's silence stretched on for a moment before he spoke again. "You know, this won't be easy, right? You're up against them both, and they have everything right now. Charlotte's got control of the company. She's got Daniel by her side. They've got the upper hand." "I know," Avi said, the determination in his voice unwavering. "But I've got something they don't. I have the truth, and I'll find a way to use it against them. I'll expose them for who they really are." Avi spent the next few weeks gathering intel. Aaron helped him track down documents, emails, and legal loopholes that could help him in his war against Charlotte and Daniel. The more Avi uncovered, the more disgusted he became. The betrayal went deeper than just the affair. Charlotte had manipulated the entire acquisition of Avitech Solutions to her advantage. She had been in talks with potential buyers behind Avi's back, working alongside Daniel to ensure that she would be able to take full control of the company once the deal was done. Avi knew he had to act quickly. If he waited too long, he would lose any chance of regaining what was rightfully his. He needed leverage, something that could give him the upper hand. One evening, as he sifted through a pile of documents in his apartment, Avi's eyes landed on a crucial piece of evidence, an email from Charlotte to one of the board members of Avitech Solutions, discussing plans to circumvent Avi's authority and take control of the company. It was clear. She had been plotting behind his back for months, playing him for the fool he had been. The pieces were falling into place, and Avi knew this was his moment. He would use this email to take Charlotte down. But he couldn't stop there. He had to ensure that Daniel paid for his part in the betrayal as well. He couldn't just go after Charlotte. He needed to destroy both of them, personally and professionally. As the days passed, Avi's plan began to take shape. He hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Daniel's past, hoping to uncover something, anything, that could be used against him. Meanwhile, he worked with Aaron to prepare a case against Charlotte and Daniel, ready to use the legal system to take back control of Avitech Solutions. But Avi knew that it wouldn't be enough to win in the courts. He needed to hurt them where it mattered most, in their own world. And he was prepared to do whatever it took to bring them down. Charlotte had played the game with him, using his love and ambition as pawns. Now Avi was going to play it with her. He had learned from his mistakes, and he was ready to take back everything he had lost. This was no longer about business. This was personal. Meanwhile, Charlotte and Daniel, secure in their victory, continued to tighten their grip on Avitech Solutions, unaware that Avi was already plotting his next move. They thought the battle was over. They thought they had won. But they hadn't seen anything yet. The rain painted Manhattan in a soft, gray silence as Avi stood by the window of a modest office in the Flatiron District. He was no longer the billionaire mogul in a high-rise penthouse. He wasn't draped in tailored suits or surrounded by sycophants. He was a man reborn through fire. And now, every ember of that fire burned for justice. Over the past 3 months, he had lived in the shadows, quietly gathering pieces of a puzzle that only he could solve. Charlotte and Daniel had assumed he was done for, licking his wounds, perhaps drinking himself into irrelevance. But they hadn't considered Avi's core strength, resilience. They hadn't factored in what it meant to betray a man who had nothing left to lose. With the help of Aaron, Avi had meticulously built his counteroffensive. Every lawsuit, every witness, every document had been quietly prepared like weapons in a war chest. The damning email from Charlotte had been only the beginning. The private investigator Avi hired unearthed an intricate web of financial deceit. Charlotte and Daniel had funneled millions from Avitech's acquisition into offshore accounts. Even worse, Daniel had been involved in backdoor deals that could amount to corporate fraud. They were dirty. And now Avi had proof. But Avi didn't want just legal revenge. He wanted a public downfall, the kind that could never be erased. He wanted Charlotte's pristine image, her curated press interviews, her influencer career, and her businesswoman persona shattered before the world. He wanted Daniel's name to be a joke in every boardroom he entered. The first step was timing. Avi waited for the right moment, the annual shareholders meeting of Avitech, now rebranded as Novarise Global under Charlotte and Daniel's management. It was being held in a grand hotel ballroom, live-streamed for investors, with press coverage lined up. The room was filled with anticipation as Charlotte took the stage, radiant and poised, speaking of innovation, leadership, and vision. Daniel stood beside her, smiling like the devil behind a charming mask. Avi entered from the back, dressed in a dark blazer and open-collar shirt. He looked leaner, sharper, like a man honed for war. No one noticed at first. But when he walked straight to the front row and sat down without invitation, murmurs began to stir. Charlotte froze mid-sentence. Daniel's smile twitched. Avi raised his hand. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice clear and calm, cutting through the buzz like a scalpel. "Before you continue, I believe the shareholders deserve to know that the co-founders of this company have been embezzling funds, engaging in corporate fraud, and violating several SEC regulations." The room went still. Charlotte tried to speak, but Avi wasn't done. "I have documentation of illegal offshore accounts, falsified board approvals, and insider trading involving both Ms. Charlotte Vaughn and Mr. Daniel Cross," Avi said, handing thick folders to seated journalists. "And I've already submitted the full dossier to the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission." Daniel lunged forward. "This is a lie? Is it?" Avi interrupted, holding up a printed email. Charlotte's email about orchestrating Avi's removal. The screen behind them, still connected to the laptop on the podium, now displayed. The email blown up 10 feet wide. The audience gasped. Charlotte's mask cracked. She reached for the laptop, but it was too late. "You used me to build this," Avi said. "Not to the room, but to her directly. You slept next to me, kissed me, made vows to me, all while planning my destruction. You used Daniel to steal my company, and now I'm taking it back." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. News broke across every major business outlet within minutes. Charlotte and Daniel were escorted out by security as shareholders demanded answers. Their stocks plummeted. Legal teams flooded their offices. Within days, federal investigators froze assets tied to offshore accounts. The SEC launched an inquiry, and a criminal investigation followed. Charlotte's once glamorous name became synonymous with scandal. She was dropped from every brand partnership and PR agency. Her social media accounts were flooded with outrage. Her image, so carefully crafted, shattered like glass. Daniel faced worse. Past business deals were re-examined. A former partner came forward with testimony of financial misconduct. Within 2 weeks, he was indicted on multiple counts of fraud. His mugshot replaced the professional headshot on every search engine. And Avi? He didn't reclaim Avitech. He didn't want the ashes. Instead, he launched a new startup, Phoenix, Arc, symbolizing rebirth. This time, it was entirely his. No partners, no blind trust. Every decision, every brick, laid by his own hand. Investors lined up to support him, not because he was a victim, but because he had survived and roared back stronger. He built a small but loyal team, prioritizing transparency and integrity. His story inspired countless entrepreneurs, not because of his fall, but because of how he got up. And when Forbes requested an interview, he said yes, but insisted it not focus on revenge. "This was never about vengeance," Avi told the interviewer. "It was about clarity. I lost everything to a lie. But in doing so, I found who I really was without the illusions. I didn't just rebuild a company. I rebuilt myself." Months passed, then a year. Charlotte was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and received a suspended sentence, avoiding jail but losing everything. Daniel, however, wasn't so lucky. He served time, and his name faded from headlines, but not from Avi's memory. One night, Avi stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city again. Not in a suit, not with champagne, just in quiet peace. The wind tugged at his coat, and in that silence, he smiled. He had loved deeply, been betrayed viciously, fallen hard, and risen even harder. He had turned heartbreak into resolve, humiliation, into fire, and injustice into action. He had lost a queen and exposed a fraud, and in doing so, he had become something stronger than he ever thought possible.